Welcome to a Legendarium special about the 1811 slave revolt on Louisiana's German coast. In this episode, we will talk about how an uprising of African American slaves very nearly took the city of New Orleans. Sometime during the year 1780, Charles Deslondes was born, either in the island colony of Saint-Domingue, now called Haiti, or French Louisiana. If born in Saint-Domingue, he joined the migration to Louisiana from Saint-Domingue after the Haitian Revolution, which erupted more than 10 years previously. Like most other black men, he was a slave who worked the plantations, which enriched his European and European-descended owners. It is believed that a white man fathered him, and in the United States, he drove other slaves at the Woodland Plantation owned by Manuel Andre of St. John Parish. He plied his bloody trade on the German coast near New Orleans on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, planning work and doling out punishment. The German coast took its name because most of the original white settlers came from Germany. By the time Deslondes and his master settled there, it had become part of the United States. Most of the other slaves hated Deslondes as a bootlicker who tortured fellow Africans for the benefit of white men. However, Deslondes secretly hated the slave-owning class which fathered him and forged him into their whip. Two men named Cook and Kuman, recent arrivals from West Africa, came to know this. Cook and Kuman were big men with ritual scars on their faces, likely warriors from Dahomey, taken and sold after losing a battle. Deslondes told these fearsome men of how the Haitian slaves overthrew their white masters. Not only did Deslondes intend to murder the slave owners, but he planned to found a new Haiti, a black republic on the banks of the Mississippi River. Many slaves trafficked during the French Revolution kept copies of the Declaration of the Rights of Man in their barracks and cabins, which inspired revolutionary thoughts. They proved very receptive to Deslondes' ideas. During the fall of 1810, a torrential rainstorm flooded southern Louisiana, leaving dirt roads a foot deep in muddy water. No work could be done, which gave Deslondes the chance to strike. On January 8, 1811, at the age of 31, Deslondes led his men into the Andre house, armed with axes. They murdered Gilbert Andre, Manuel's son, and wounded Manuel, who paddled across the Mississippi River despite bleeding profusely. They seized weapons, alcohol, and work animals, then marched through St. Charles and St. John the Baptist parishes 40 miles from New Orleans. Like the Haitian rebels 20 years ago, they took and wore European-style uniforms. They also carried banners, marched to the beat of drums, and split into units with leaders on horseback. Rebels carried cane knives used to harvest sugar cane, clubs, hoes, and guns as they chanted "Freedom or Death" and "To New Orleans!" The slaves set plantations on fire as they marched and recruited more slaves to their cause. White residents fled to the city or to the backwoods, yet not every plantation owner feared the rebel slaves. They included Jean-François Trepanier, a local plantation owner so cruel that, according to local legend, he kept a slave boy named Gustave on a leash and threw him table scraps as if he were a dog. When a loyal slave told Trepanier of the coming danger, he scoffed. He sat on his porch with a musket and awaited the rebels. When they approached, he opened fire, not hitting anything or anyone. Cook walked around Trepanier's house, snuck around to the porch, and buried his axe in Trepanier's skull. Such stories created such a panic that Governor William Claiborne took the drastic step of closing every bar and tavern in the state in the fear they would become headquarters for more rebel slaves. He also called upon General Wade Hampton to raise the local militias and suppress the revolt at any cost. Though Deslondes' men possessed few firearms, they engaged Hampton only 3 days after the rebellion began. On January 11th, 1811, near Francois Bernard's plantation, located on a river bend, the slaves assembled with pikes, hoes, and axes. Hampton laid an ambush encircling the slave army under cover of night. At the end of 2 days' fighting, Deslondes fell back to lure the army into another ambush. Little did he know that the slave owners assembled a second militia, which stumbled upon the slave army. African drums pounded as the slave army charged the planters' militia. Heavy rain obscured the vision of both sides, but the slave army soon ran out of ammunition. As the slaves fled, the militia slaughtered them. When survivors hurried into the swamps, the planters sniffed them out with bloodhounds. Deslondes became a prisoner along with 25 others. Estimates of the time claimed that 66 rebels died, with a further 17 missing. Beginning on January 13, 1811, a 2-day tribunal at the Deslondes plantation under Judge Pierre Bouchet Saint Martin determined the fate of the survivors. Cook freely and proudly confessed to killing Trepanier with an axe and paid for this with his life, as did many others. To avenge the death of his son, Manuel André chopped off Deslondes' arms and legs before throwing him into a fire where he screamed out his last. In total, the tribunal sentenced 16 men to death by firing squad. The tribunal also decapitated slain rebels and displayed their heads along the river as a warning to others, something replicated by stone statues in a modern-day memorial to the rebellion. A display of 100 heads mounted on spikes stretched for 60 miles from Woodland Plantation to New Orleans. Plantation owners who helped suppress the rebellion chopped off rebels' arms and legs and displayed them near the river to frighten their own slaves. Newspapers portrayed the rebellion as driven not by a longing for freedom, but brigandage by lawless and ungrateful men. Meanwhile, their oppressors would be honored in the street and town names of southern Louisiana, like the city of Claiborne. Meanwhile, Deslondes would be forgotten for more than 200 years until the latest generation of historians revived his name. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.